Most microbrand watches that I look at are under $1,000 because for me, that just seems like the price range where you can get into something interesting, have some fun, but it's still not such a crazy amount of money that you feel like you're totally committed to it. Once I start to think about the $2,000 to $5,000 price range, I kind of automatically start going towards Longines, Omega, Tudor. But what if some of those more established brands are maybe a bit too pedestrian and you like the fun factor you get with micros under $1,000? What does it look like for micros from $2,000 to $5,000? That's kind of what I would define as the entry-level luxury tier of the microbrand watch space. For the purpose of this video, any microbrand is really just any independent watch producer that's manufacturing watches in this $2,000 to $5,000 price range in relatively low quantities, but kind of getting into the weeds of what's a microbrand versus what's a boutique brand versus an independent. I'm not going to do that in this video, but feel free to jump in the comments and tell me which one you think these brands are. The first brand I want to talk about is Ming, and I absolutely love Ming. Ming is so much fun. They do such cool stuff, and they were founded in 2017 by a photographer, engineer, designer, and you can really see that come through in the products that Ming's putting out. So a lot of these watches play with visual depth. One of the defining characteristics of Ming that I've come to associate with the brand are the etching that is done into the sapphire crystals that are then filled with lume. And that is how the indices on these watches are produced. So you get this really cool effect. It's like an inverse sandwich dial kind of, where instead of the indices being down below the dial, it's up on the crystal. And it really just creates this visual interest in a way that you don't see in other watches, because this is something that I haven't seen really from anybody else. I'm sure there's other brands doing it, but this is something that I associate with Ming and I think is incredibly cool. It's interesting because I feel like Ming often toes this line between visually interesting and visual depth, but also maintaining a minimalist design, which kind of seems like it could be in contrast to each other, those two concepts. But the way that they marry those two ideas together creates such elegant pieces. And I'm not a big dress watch guy. Like, I think a lot of these fall into the dress watch category. They do have like dive watches and they have other sportier models, but for the most part, these kind of walk and talk a little bit like dress watches, and I'm obsessed with them, and I shouldn't be because it's not really what I gravitate toward in watch collecting, but I need a Ming. I need a Ming so bad. The Ming that I was able to get my hands on and spend some time with is the 17.09. 1709? I don't know how they say it. I've only read it online, but it is sort of their most basic. It's one of their core collection. And they don't actually produce this watch anymore, but you can pick it up in the $2,500 to $3,000 range. And it's your classic blue dial with this really neat guilloche stepped dial. And the way that it plays with the light and plays with depth, like I had mentioned, with the crystal, as well as the step dial and the guilloche pattern, is just gorgeous. The movement on the inside is the caliber 330.M1, based on the Sellita SW330-2 with independent hours and hacking seconds, but no second hand. So that's a fun feature, that you can hack seconds, but you can't tell where the seconds are. So I'm curious if that's just kind of like a holdover from the SW330, or if other no seconds hand watches typically have that sort of feature. But an interesting point. I really love the blue on this dial. It's super deep, and the way that it catches the light, you get a little bit of like, not totally like a sunburst effect, but sort of in that realm, with the way the light plays off of the guilloche pattern, and the hands set recessed into that lower portion of the step dial in a way that's just so satisfying. I really like this watch a lot. I mean, I love the blue dial. I love the flared lugs on it. It's a 38.5 millimeter case. It's only 10 millimeters thick. So it wears like you would want a dress watch to wear, but it's also not so dressy that you feel like you couldn't wear it in other circumstances. I think it makes a great everyday watch, as do a lot of other Ming watches. And the application of lume, I'm just such a big fan of lume. Lume is like one of my favorite things about watches. Like, hey, it glows in the dark. And that still speaks to me like I'm a child with like light up shoes on. But I think it's really cool to have a fun everyday watch that's a bit on the dressy side, but still has lume and still has all these interesting characteristics that Ming brings to the table. And I just am super infatuated with everything that Ming's doing. My favorite model, they've just released a new moon phase, which is the 3705 Series 3. But I think my favorite Ming of all time is probably the Series 2 3705 moon phase. It's just a really fun piece, taking a traditionally dressy complication in a moon phase and making it this whimsical Starry Night approach with a really neat radial sunburst finishing coming out of the moon phase complication. It's just fantastic. It really captures everything that I love about Ming, which is that interesting minimalism. I've been pretty vocal about loving tool watches and not necessarily loving dress watches, but I will absolutely have a Ming in my collection at some point. The next watch I want to talk about is the Fears Brunswick 40 Topper Edition. So this is a really cool brand in the sense that it brings something to the table that not a lot of micro boutique brands necessarily have, which is a really valid, legitimate history behind the brand. The Fear family began producing watches in 1846, and many of the watches that they currently produce are actually references from their back catalog. A lot of micro brands accomplish the vintage approach by borrowing ideas from established brands that we know and love, like Rolex or Omega, or many of the other mainstream Swiss watch brands that were around in the mid-century, etc. And Fears doesn't actually have to do that. They can pull from their very own back catalog. The Brunswick itself, this cushion case steel watch, is actually based on a model that they produced in the 1920s. Fears watches are designed and produced in the UK, and I believe they were a casualty of the quartz crisis in the 70s, but they were recently revitalized in 2016 by an actual member of the Fears lineage. So this isn't a manufactured history. This is, a direct descendant of the Fear family that was producing watches since the mid-19th century, has retaken up the mantle and really started producing stuff that's super cool, super interesting, meaningful collaborations. They're doing a lot of things right, and a lot of things that I think people look for in the micro brand space. And when you're talking entry-level luxury, you kind of expect a little bit more, not just in fit and finish, but also what else is this bringing to the table to justify this increased price over something that I could find for $500 or $1,000. And I think that Fear's history and legitimacy of that authentic brand notoriety is something really cool that you don't often get in this space. This Topper edition of the Brunswick only had 25 pieces produced in this colorway. So it's really neat to also have a super limited piece that's a boutique edition of this model, one of their most popular models, and it looks fantastic. It has a white California dial with a really interesting texture pattern, and the lume is absolutely incredible. And paired with the orange accents of the watch, I think it works incredibly well. The case is a 40mm stainless steel case with brushing and polishing, with a 20mm lug width and 150 meters of water resistance. It comes with a white textured dial with gray and orange printing and hand-applied indices and a California-style configuration featuring X1 grade Super Luminova. The strap this model comes with is an orange textile handmade strap, and the canvas on it feels super great quality. I actually really like the way it looked, and I kept throwing it on the Ming when I wasn't wearing the Fears. I'm like, putting this on the Ming. And I was a big fan of how comfortable it was and just how it looked. And as I mentioned before, this was a limited edition of only 25 pieces. This is number 8 of 25. But I'm just generally a big fan of what Fears is doing, and I'm really excited to see which watches they start turning out in the future. Next, we're going to talk about the most interesting watch brand on this list, which is Colloquium. Colloquium was established in 2020 by a group that was trying to take a totally different approach to watchmaking, with emphasis on design and different ways to produce watches that maybe haven't been done before. The first concept that Colloquium rolled out was the Project One, which is a super wild concept. And the first time you see it, it's like, whoa, what am I even looking at? It was actually pretty challenging to photograph, but essentially it's a cylindrical glass box crystal with a dial composed of pins with varying diameters and lengths that create this really bizarre 3D effect. I kind of liken it to the pin toy that you would have maybe as a kid, where you could put your hand up through and it leaves an impression of your hand. It very much looks like that, but the concentration and the pattern of the pins utilized will create the indices, and they'll start to kind of materialize. If you look really close, and say you're looking at macro shots of this watch, you might have no idea what you're looking at. But when you take a step back, you can kind of see how the pattern produces something that sort of looks like a watch dial. I mean, not totally, but kind of. And I just think it's a super fun concept. Like, I haven't seen anything else like this. And to get watches with these crazy kind of ideas, you're typically looking at the very upper echelon of like high-end luxury watchmaking. Like, this seems like something more like MB&F would try maybe. And to have it in a watch brand that's in the $3,000 to $4,000 price range is actually kind of a steal. I'll say it. This isn't something you find in this price range, really, something that's this creative. And, you know, I don't know that it's necessarily for me on like an everyday, like, hey, am I just going to always throw on this crazy colloquium watch? But it was so fun to handle and to wear around, and I really enjoyed shooting it. And I think these really speak to a certain type of collector that like the more avant-garde style design, and you don't have to spend tens of thousands of dollars to get that, which I mean, the value there is huge, which I know we're talking, you know, $3,000 to $4,000 watches here, but I think that is a massive value. So to get into some of the specifications, it is a 2-part die-cast 316L stainless steel case, and you can very clearly see the 2 different components of the case that are married together. The diameter is 40 millimeters, and the height without sapphire crystal is 7 millimeters, and the height with the sapphire crystal is 11.9 millimeters. So it's very interesting to wear. Like, you look at this thing from the side, and yes, the actual case itself, those components are not super thick, and then you have this big old glass cylinder on the top, this little like fishbowl that goes over this, that goes over the dial and all the lume, and it is just a wild thing to look at. It comes with a solid case back, and I really love the messaging that they put on their case backs. It's like fun and like, hey, we don't take ourselves too seriously, even though we're doing these like crazy, wild concepts on these watches. That's a nice touch that I really enjoyed. It has a valve-shaped crown. I don't know what that means, but look at the crown. I guess that's valve-shaped. That's what the website says. They're calling it a textured dial, but I think the dial is like relatively flat, but it has those 488 cylinders of varying sizes that comprise the main components of the dial. And the cool thing that I haven't mentioned about these dial cylinders, these pins on this watch face, is that they're all completely comprised of lume. So this is Violet Super Luminova. The lume's also applied to the hour and minute markers, so it matches the rest of the dial. And it's a really cool thing because I don't think I've ever even seen a watch with purple lume on it. And this is all of the lume. Like, they had a really great marketing video when this thing first launched of like how much lume they actually used on these watches. And it's super neat, and it was a main component of the marketing. And like I'd already mentioned in the Ming portion of the video, I love lume, and this was something that I had to have in person to kind of see and experience for myself. You just have to get one of these on wrist and see it in person. I think it's something that everybody kind of needs to experience, even if this isn't really your vibe or your lane of watches that you enjoy. I think just as a novelty, it's something that you should check out. And, you know, I will say that as a watch that was completely marketed around the lume, I was a little disappointed by the lume. And I think a lot of that's just because this is the Violet. I don't think this has anything to do with the brand did anything wrong. It's been a while, but I've seen like a chart of lume and varying different types of lume and which colors produce the most light. I think green is like the brightest of all the super luminovas, right? But then there's also blue, I think, is kind of up there. But the lowest rated luminance on a lot of these lume products was down in the red to violet range. So I think that's kind of what's going on. It's not going to pop. Like, it's not going to give that, you know, real crisp pop of color that you're used to seeing on, like, I don't know, maybe like a Seiko or my Tudor. Like the green lume on that's really great. So I will say I was a little bit disappointed in that. I can't really complain too much because they threw all the lume at it, and that's just what the lume looks like. But their first issue that was a green dial, I think that one probably glows brighter. I haven't seen that one in person, but I would imagine that one has a little bit more pop than this one does. And while we're talking about colloquium, I borrowed this from a buddy of mine, Brad. Shout out to Brad. Thank you for letting me steal all your watches. But he was actually part of the very first group of people that bought like the first Project One that came out, the green dial one. So now he's like on the friends and family list, and he just bought, it was just released right before I made this video, is the new Project 2, which I think that is like probably more for me. Like, the pin dial is cool and it's like a fun novelty, but this new Project 2 is like a topographic relief map where it has different slabs of dial material that are stacked on top of each other to produce like sort of the kind of the same effect that they went for with the pin dial, where it's like, oh, you can kind of see the indices materialize out of this pattern. And it does the same thing. And it looks so badass. I have to get, I'm so glad that, Brad, I'm so glad you bought this watch because I need to see this watch. I need to wear it. I'm a geologist. I do like a lot of like, topographic maps or a big part of like coming through, the geology programs and stuff. So like seeing this, I was like, oh, it's a ton of fun. And I have like this weird fun connection to it. And I need to see it. So Brad, send it. The last brand that I want to talk about is Manta. I actually haven't handled Manta in person, so big asterisk there. Have not handled Manta, but I think everybody that's in the watch space and a lot of Microbrand enthusiasts and appreciators, there's a lot of Manta diehard fans out there. So Manta is well known for their fit and finishing, like the quality of the product that they're producing for about $2,000 to $2,500 is supposed to be about the best that you can get for that price range. I've kind of heard the comparison of like, hey, they're like the Rolex of microbrands, which I think you could probably say that for a couple reasons. Some of their stuff, I don't want to, got to be careful about using the word homage, or homage. I think some of their models definitely flirt with the homage-y space. Especially this last watch that they released that kind of looks like an Explorer with like an Explorer 369 dial without the 6. Kind of funky, but I know that the Manta SkyQuest has been something that people have fawned over. I personally like the Atlas. I think it's like a great go anywhere, do anything watch. Everybody knows I'm a big fan of Traska and their Venturer. This kind of reminds me of like Manta's version of the Venturer. So kind of an everyday vibe, wears really well. Comes in the right diameter of 38 millimeters and can kind of go anywhere and do anything. So if I were to venture into the Manta space, I think the Atlas GMT would be something that I would go for. So there it is, 4 entry-level luxury micro brands that might be the right micro brands for you if you're looking to kind of step up your micro game from that $500 to $1,000 price point up to the $2,000 to $5,000. And I think that you still get a lot of value. I know it's tough for a lot of people to say, hey, I'm going to spend $3,000 on a micro brand watch when, they could go get a Tudor or something with a little bit more cachet, something that people would know about and recognize a little bit more than some of these potentially more obscure micro brands. But I think it's for the collector that buys watches for themselves. And I know that that's a lot of people. I also think that there is a large contingent of people that like, hey, I want to have something that has a brand name, and that's not wrong. Like, I'm not saying this is a dig on people that, maybe you don't buy a watch for yourself, but I think there is something too, like, hey, this thing has a brand name that people will recognize, and that makes me feel good. It makes me feel accomplished. Like I reached this threshold that I can wear a Tudor or an Omega or a Rolex or something like that. And maybe this is the step you take after you have that watch. Maybe you buy the more mainstream brand, the more well-known brand, and then you're like, all right, I'm going to buy a Colloquium. I'm going to buy something crazy that people are going to look at and be like, I have no idea what that is. And I think that's a big part of watch enthusiasm for me, is being able to see something new and exciting. And I think a lot of these watches that I mentioned bring that, and I want that for you all too. But hey, thank you guys for checking out this video. I really appreciate all the love and attention I got from my last video, my best watches for new enthusiasts. It was really fun seeing that kind of pop off a little bit. I've only had like 100 subscribers and I'm up to like 420 something. So yay. But yeah, getting like 15,000 views in a week was like a big deal for me. So I really appreciate it. And thanks for everybody that came back to check out this video. Definitely comment on this one also. And I'm curious to see like which watches you would go for in that $2,000 to $5,000 space that aren't some of the like bigger luxury Swiss brands. I do love hearing about watches that you all have bought, and I have learned about some brands in the comments of previous videos, so definitely keep that coming. I love being able to find something new. It's like, oh, I don't really know about this brand. I'm going to go down the rabbit hole. This is going to be a fun 3 hours today that I get to go explore something new. So I love when you guys do that. Much appreciated. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And I will see you all on the next one. Thanks.